Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast.
This is the Slow Poisoner. I come to you from the future with these words of warning.
It's a hot horror planet. 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 Living in science fiction. Past the point of no returning. We got high on gasoline. And we blew the scene.
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 90. Woo! This episode is sponsored by the fine folks at Lee's Comics. Attention comic book fans. Lee's Comics of Mountain View, California has closed. But here's the good news. Lee's Comics eBay store is still going strong with over 10,000 vintage comics, the majority of which are now on sale for half off. Choose from Lee's huge stock of golden, silver, bronze, and modern age comics, and specializing in Silver Age Marvel titles. You can count on friendly service, accurate grading, and quick, secure shipping backed by a money-back guarantee. To check out Lee's eBay store, go to eBay. Click Advanced Search to the left of the search bar, scroll down to Sellers, and enter Lee's Comics Inc., period. That's LeeScomics Inc., period. Don't forget the period. Lee's Comics is shipping daily with no delays. New items daily. Mention the Fun Ideas Podcast and get a free bonus gift.
Long title, Looking for the Good Times, Examining the Monkey Song One by One, by Michael A. Ventrella and Mark Arnold. A book that examines each song, gives lots of details about each song, and our own personal opinions. You can find this book on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, and anywhere where good books are being sold. Our webpage is wordpress.monkeys.com, where you can see many of the songs and give your own opinions of them. And we will be discussing this more on Zilch.
Hey, Michael, it says here we've written another book about the monkeys. Wasn't the first one enough?
Not at all, Mark. Our original book, Looking for the Good Times, Examining the Monkey Songs One by One, was very successful, but only covered half the story.
Which half?
The group half. Our new book, Headquartered, A Timeline of the Monkeys' Solo Years, covers the solo half.
Who knew the monkeys record so many solo albums?
Not only that, but this book covers all of their solo projects, including stage shows, horse racing, running record labels, directing and starring in TV shows and movies, voice acting, and jail.
Jail? Did the monkeys go to jail?
Ah, you have to read the book to find out.
You sold me. Have you sold them?
Who's them?
Those people out there listening to this.
Well, listen to this. This book has discographies, photos, and other information about the Prefab Four, Mickey, Davey, Peter, and Mike, the Solo Monkeys, plus another nifty cover by Scott Shaw.
Wow, he did our last cover. And this one's equally good. Where can you get this masterpiece?
Announcer.
Announcer? That's me. Get Headquartered, a timeline of the Monkey solo years, written by Michael A. Ventrella and Mark Arnold. Those two guys. It's available in hardback, paperback, or ebook from BearManorMedia.com or from Amazon. Get your copies today.
Cool. I'm going to get one today. The Warren Kremer book is now being laid out again after a long delay. And I'm still working on my Disney and Mad books and an article about Popeye. Today we feature the first of two-part interview with our guest, the preeminent animation historian, Jerry Beck. There is also a video version of the complete interview available on YouTube, so please check it out. And welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 90. Woo! And on the show today, our second video presentation, we have the legendary Jerry Beck.
That's me.
How are you today?
I'm doing fine. I want to get Casper in the picture here. Here we go. Just for you, Mark. Just for the Harveyville fun times. All the Harveyville fun times that I've had. Doesn't make any sense anyway.
So as I usually do on every one of these shows, I usually say, tell us a little bit about yourself. And in your case, I know you have a lot of interest, but we'll start off with animation because that's what you're best known for. How you got interested in animation?
Oh, I feel like I've told this story before, and I probably have. So I hope if there's anybody watching, I hope it's not going to bore you again. Kid, I was a kid. I was in school. I loved comic books. I got into comic books, when I was like, I now realize I got into it later than a lot of other people. Like I was 8 years old, 1963. I'll give out my dates and years and all that stuff. But 63 was the first year I even saw a comic book. And I was 8 years old, and I loved them. I got into Superman right away, and DC and Marvel about a year later. But I just love it, and I wanted to draw. I just sort of the thing I wanted to be an artist and draw. I thought that would be a good job. Somehow I had that thought in my mind, and so I drew a lot as a kid, and I wanted to be a cartoonist, and back in those days, everybody forgets, this is the 60s and the 70s even. Reading comic books when you were older than a certain age, you were looked at as a pretty silly, I could use worse words. People really looked down at you that, you were like, something was wrong with you if you still not only read comic books, but watched cartoons. Because nobody remembers this, but 1968, 9, the 70s, it was, unless, and I heard Danny Fingeroth on one of your previous podcasts talk about going to the 1970 Comic-Con. In 1968, when I was 13, I went to the first Phil Seuling Comic-Con. I happened to be lucky enough to live in New York City, and in Queens in my case. And, my grandmother found an article about this comic book convention that was going on, and she was reading the Saturday newspaper. And I was reading it like, what's the, the next day on Sunday, with a few dollars in my pocket, I went to this Statler Hilton in Manhattan. And I remember the elevator door opening, and I seeing a dealer's room and seeing boxes of old comic books and fanzines and things. And I'm like, holy shit. I mean, at 13, I found my world. This is my universe. And I still wanted to be a comic book artist, but in the next few years, going to high school, getting fanzines is the only thing that kept me alive. Those were my lifeline. We didn't have the internet back then. We didn't, it was a different world. So I wanted to be, I started watching cartoons when I came home from school. Bugs Bunny and Casper were on in New York back to back. Casper at, I think, 3 or 3:30 and Bugs Bunny at 3:30 or 4 or something like that. And I watched those things while I was working. I couldn't believe, I couldn't imagine, how do you take something that's drawing and have it move and talk? It just was an unimaginable thing. I got into figuring that out. I also began to realize in my teenage years that the animation was funny, and at least in the case of the Warner Brothers cartoons. I thought they were really, really funny, and I was beginning to get all the jokes I never got before when I watched these. Yeah. So I got really interested in the cartoons, and the thing is, back then, this is the mid-70s, early 70s, there were no books. There was no books. There was no internet. There was nowhere to go to learn what was the name of that cartoon I just saw. How many were there? Who directed these? Who made them? There was nowhere to go. The closest thing was Mike Barrier with Funny World. Funny World.
I didn't even know about that. So.
Funny World came out in, the famous, he started doing those in the 60s. I didn't know about this then, but in a part of Kappa Alpha. And then the 12th issue, which I think was 1970, was the famous Bob Clan. He instantly went from a crummy mimeographed fanzine to a professional typeset, beautiful magazine called Funny World. And that alone was something to be in awe of. I remember I was at a creation convention in 1972, I think it was. Could have been 73. Might have been 72. And somebody was selling I think it was the 13th issue, which is the one that has Chuck Jones, big interview with Chuck Jones. And there's a Carl Stalling interview in it.
Yep.
And the magazine cover says, or on the back cover, it says, interview with Chuck Jones, Carl Stalling, and it's a professional looking magazine. And I kept thinking, there's a magazine that has interviews with Carl Stahl. Who in the world knows who that is unless you're watching these cartoons? Anyway, I bought that thinking there's a world out there that is into this. And but it was really just Mike Barrier and the few people who read Funny World. And most of those people were reading it because he was talking about Karl Barks and stuff like that. And I ate that up completely, and I was a little bit of a minor pen pal with him, but not quite. But anyway, I got into the history of animation. I started going to School of Visual Arts in New York. I wanted to be an animator after high school. And the problem is, in the mid-'70s, as we know, that was the nadir, if that's the right word. Is nadir the right word? I think it's the opposite. Yeah. What's the opposite of nadir, though? It's the bottom. The bottom.
Nadir's the bottom, yeah. The peak is the other, or whatever.
Okay, nadir.
The climax or the...
No, nadir is the word.
Nadir is the bottom, yeah.
Okay, it's the nadir. I had the right word in the first place.
Yes.
The nadir. It's the nadir of the animation universe. I mean, except for Patty Freeling, except for, I mean, really, even Walter Lantz had given up. I mean, there was no animation happening. Disney was still making stuff like the Aristocats and Robin Hood, which I think were the worst or some of the worst of the Disney animated. That's me. The Hanna-Barbera had started farming out animation to Australia and Japan and whatever. So the thing is, animation looked awful. That was on Saturday morning. The new theatricals that were being made were bad. The only highlight, if you want to call it that, was Ralph Bakshi and Fritz the Cat. And heavy traffic. There was really not much going on in the animation universe. And Walt Disney had died. There was no leader for animation. Yeah. So it was just an unusual period. And to get a job in animation, which I was trying to do, was an impossibility because the people from the golden age were still around. Maybe they were in their 50s and 60s or so. They were still working. Right. And I was in New York. And weirdly enough, there was a big animation industry in New York as well as in LA, of course, but there was still a thriving, somewhat, thriving is not the right word, but there was still a lot of animation studios like Xander, and there was a bunch of them, and they made commercials like, I still remember the Freakies. You remember that cereal, the Freakies? Oh, yeah. We are the Freak. That commercial was made in New York, the Xander animation parlor. I remember when that commercial came on, like it blew my mind. It's like, whoa, Phil Animation. It was fantastic looking. Yeah. So things like that. But to get a job working, you had to be amazingly good, and even those people had a hard time getting a job. I know I'm digressing, but I'll end with this. At that point, I actually became friends with Eric Goldberg and Tom Cito. They were actually either in class with me, or Eric was kind of floating around, and they were but they were both great animators. And Dan Haskett, who's working on the Looney Tunes cartoons right now, one of the best animators ever in the business, whether you know his name or not, is amazing. Guy's been around. These people were fantastic. They were young then, and they couldn't get a job. It was very, very difficult to get in, and I couldn't draw anything like these guys. Yeah. So I sort of had this big epiphany with myself, which was I can't get into the field I'm interested in. I wasn't sure what to do. And I decided to do two things. One was there was no books on animation history. There was nothing, no research, nothing going on. So this is now I'm getting to answering your question. So this is around 1974. Yeah, definitely. That was 73, 74, around that period. And I thought I'm going to research anime just on the side. And meanwhile, I had a fluky, lucky, wonderful situation where I started getting a job. I worked in Wall Street, and I was doing junk. I couldn't care less about it. I was just doing a job. It was just a job to pay the rent kind of a thing when I was young. And I found out I was working like in what they called the computer room, because people didn't have computers on their desks back in the 70s. Right, but we did have a big, massive computer floor. Most big companies did. And they would generate reports, and then I was just a clerk. I worked in the computer room. I fed the cards to the machine. I would hand the reports to the executives. I did stuff like that. But that led me to getting a similar job like that with United Artists. United Artists, amazingly, was located in New York, not L.A., and they had a whole building, 729 7th Avenue. I later found out that was where the Van Buren studios were back in the 30s. And across the street was 1600 Broadway, which is where Fleischer was back in the 30s. And so that was kind of cool. And I ended up, so I got this great job at United Artists in the computer room first, but that led me to, they had luckily job openings in other departments, and I had to get out of that. And I ended up in the 16 millimeter department, which was a department that rented films to, schools and hospitals and prisons and things like that. But it was a great place for me to be for a variety of reasons, which I may or may not go into or get into there. But that's how I had an epiphany. I had to figure out what I was going to do for a living in this world. And so I got this job at a movie distribution place, and which led to a lot of things in my life later. But meanwhile, there was a class going on, unbelievably, at the New School, the famous New School for Social Research in Manhattan. And Leonard Maltin, who was pretty much unknown, although he had written the great movie shorts and the Disney films, those 2 books, and others, actually.
We had a fanzine, didn't he?
Yes, Film Fan Monthly. And he was, and I was a big, I was like a fan of his. I had gotten the Disney films that just come out, and I was like, oh my God, this book is great, because it had a lot of information about the Disney films and shorts and stuff, and I would love to meet this guy. And unbelievably, he was teaching a class at the New School on the history of animation. I said, oh my God, I have to meet this guy. I have to go there. Turned out to be a 4-credit class, meaning you had to be enrolled into this university to take it. But amazingly, they allowed you, a person from the outside, to just take the class. You just had to pay the tuition
to sit in.
It was like,
basically,
it was like $200. I mean, which you got to understand, $200 is like saying $1,000 today or more. Even, it was a lot of money, and I crazily did it. I did it because I wanted to meet this guy, and I wanted to hear what he had to say, and I wanted to see. I said, this is a thing I have to see. You have to remember, again, there was nothing like this,
right?
And there was like less than 10 people in the class. It was very small. And I went to this day, I have on my shelf, I have the copy of the Disney films. I brought it with me, and I got him to autograph it, and he dated it. So I have the actual date that we met, written in a book, and we became friends like immediately. We became friends. And so he kept doing this class, and so that's a whole other story I won't go into here. But we ultimately worked on Of Mice and Magic, the book, the famous, infamous
I got
Of Mice
2
and Magic.
copies of it. I have
2 of them. You got the hardcover? Yes.
Hardcover.
I love
And
that.
that's the revised paperback, actually.
That is the revised paperback.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I actually had the original paperback, but that's the one that I got in 1980. That the corner is ripped off and the back is split and everything, because I looked at that voraciously for years. Yeah, that's how mine looks.
Is completely
So the revised version is actually quite nice. I haven't dinged it up too much because I actually look at the hardback more often. But so you said a lot of stuff, and I wrote down a few things, and so I'm going to ask you a few things. So, and I do this all the time. I backtrack, and
I need you to do this so that someday when somebody wants to know about my life, they can come to this.
There it is. There's the intro. It took 10 minutes, but that's fine. Anyway, okay. The amazing thing is your story is very similar to mine.
Yeah.
Although you got to flash forward about 10 years. I wanted to be a cartoonist. I wanted to be an animator. But then I looked around and I saw the same basically shitty deal. I said, Rubik, the Amazing Cube, is that the best you can come up with? I can't work on this stuff, and it's like Disney was working on the Black Cauldron for 100 years. And I said, no, I didn't know they're going to have a resurgence in the late 80s with DuckTales and Simpsons and blah, blah, blah. So I kind of lived through our friends like Mike Cazala and Milton Knight. They went through what I could have gone through, but I'm glad I didn't, in retrospect.
I met Milton in the 1970s at those comic book. That's me and Milton go way back to those days. Go ahead.
Anyway, so now you mentioned something on those early conventions that your grandmother clipped out the ad and said, oh, look, you might be interested in this. My grandmother was the opposite. She was like, "You're 10 years old now. It's time to give up the comic books, right?
Right.
No. You're 11 years old now. It's time to give up the comic books, right?
Right.
No." You know, if she was alive now, you're 53 now, 54 coming up in December. Giving up the comics books? No.
Oh my God. My grandmother.
So,
I
what was she like?
got to interrupt. I'm gonna interrupt her. I'm sorry. My grandmother once came around that same time. She came downstairs. She was cleaning the house. I was visiting, and she said, "Maybe you'd like these." And one of them, I forgot what the other one was, but she gave me a copy of like Mad Comics. I forgot what issue. It's the one with the Western cover, that Harvey Kurtzman Western cover.
Yeah,
but it was one of the EC comics. I remember looking at it like, what planet did this come from? I didn't know Mad was a comic book, and she just handed it to me. It was literally one of those, found it in the attic things. And I'm like, anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And so was she supportive of all this, I guess? And your parents too, or what? I mean, it's like...
yeah. My grandmother was pretty, unconditional love kind of person. She just sort of like whatever we were into, she was cool to support it. It wasn't, she just happened to be reading the daily news, and recently on Facebook or the internet somewhere, somebody found the actual, wasn't an ad, it was a newspaper article in the Daily News about a comic book conventions being held this weekend, and it was from a Saturday paper, and it mentioned that it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I somebody recently found it, and I somewhere on my computer I made a screen cap of it, because that's the thing that really launched, as far as I'm concerned, it really launched me into this world. I ultimately did the movie programs. I started to collect film, like 16 millimeter film, and I ultimately by 1976 I was doing the film program for Phil Suling at the convention in New York. I was like the film guy, and I did that for Creation as well in New York. Anyway.
What were the conventions like back then? I mean, obviously they weren't like San Diego is now with hundreds of thousands of people.
I somehow think you're old enough, and maybe I'm wrong, that you might remember how they were like, because the
earliest one I went to is 91.
Tell me what year.
91. It was the first year
91,
they did it.
No, they were still small.
Yeah.
91.
Yeah, you could get around.
Yeah. 90. I mean, to me with San Diego, it doesn't begin to get uber crazy till somewhere in the previous decade, in the early. I still remember going in whatever year Ghost World
2006
came out,
or something.
I remember whenever Ghost World came out, which I think was 2002, or I don't know when that was. Yeah. I remember walking into the convention on a Thursday, someone saying, "Hey, they're giving out free tickets to see Ghost World." Going over, the guy couldn't give them away fast enough. I mean, because nobody cared. I got the free ticket. I went over to the theater. I saw the movie. I mean, it was a different world. That was still in this. That was the 21st century. That's kind of that. Whatever year that was close to the end. Oh, another year. I'm sorry. I say I'm digressing. Another year that was close to the end. This shows you how small conventions were, in my mind. As late as 2005, I hosted. I can't believe it. I look at myself as an unknown fan, but Jerry Beck, hosted the Hall H Disney presentation, which was the things that were being shown and the people coming out were represented Cars, the first Cars, and that, what was the name of that Sky High, that superhero movie? And I brought out the stars. I was the host, Jerry Beck.
Oh, so you brought like Kurt Russell and stuff.
After that year, somebody like me would never be the host in there again. It was always celebrities, or you had to be a famous writer or something. Yeah. But up until that point, Hollywood hadn't completely embraced the con yet. But right at 2005 is sort of the end.
Yeah, that's probably about it. Yeah.
But what was it like? It was weirdly enough,
way back in the early 70s. I mean, because you said it was kind of looked down upon. It was better when I was a kid, but not much.
No. In New York City. Okay, this is how I remember the first conventions of the late 60s and early 70s. There's the Pennsylvania Hotel in New York City. It's right across the street from Grand Central, Pennsylvania Station, and Madison Square Garden on 8th Avenue, 8th Avenue and like 34th Street or something, 32nd Street. And you go into this hotel and people are doing their things, a big hotel. You go to the elevator bank because it's on the 18th floor. You go all the way up. People are looking at you weird. You get up to the 18th floor, the doors open, you don't see anything. There's no posters, and you walk through them glass doors. There was a room that had the panels straight ahead, no signs, no artwork, no posters, no fans hanging out in costume. It was nothing. And then the other way, you'd go in and there'd be what we'd call the dealer's room. And then you'd finally see old movie posters, just like today, old movie posters and lots of comic racks, very similar to what you'd see at Lee's Comics or whatever. I mean,
so it'd be like a small show today.
Yes, it would be like a small show. But the thing is, back in those days, there was no show. So the thing is, it was pretty amazing. It looked big to me, and I think us. Even if there was only, and I found out later, 300, 400, 500 people, which sounds like nothing. It was 300, 400, 500 people who cared about the same stuff you did, and they were all there. By the way, another thing about the old conventions that was really cool was this lasted for a long time. I think it's ended now, but it probably ended again in the last 20 years. But there was a thing about in the old days where there was like this universal, like there was an assumption that everybody cared about all of this stuff, and in my mind, they were right. If you liked comics, you liked Carl Barks and Little Lulu and Superman and Kirby and Marvel and Warren and whatever else was going on, and you liked the Golden Age, and Captain Marvel and all this stuff. It was like assumed that you liked, that you were into it all. And you know what? You kind of got taken in by it, and you
were able to be in all of it. There wasn't so much that it was overwhelming. I don't think.
It seemed to me that everybody was into all of it because it all was part of the same world, a world that the real world rejected. That's one reason why I'm not to go down on that subject. That's how I got into the original anime, the old anime from those days, because that was also, there were a few people who were into that, and I listened. And I said, "Oh, that's interesting," and I got into it too. It was.
I got into it on the early stuff like Speed Racer and Kimba and stuff. But later on, I just kind of said, not for me.
No, I agree.
But that's like everything else. It's like I pay attention to what's going on, not as well as you do, which is a question I have for later. But it's like, there's so much, you have to pick and choose at this point. Today's another world. I'm finally turning into the old man who actually, I love the way it used to be. It was actually easy in retrospect. But anyway, go ahead, ask your. So you and I both wanted to be animators. I realized I didn't myself. Didn't think I was as good as anybody else. So was that your same takeaway? Why you changed, or was it more the industry?
It was both that there was no work. It was what I said before, and the fact that I was actually friendly with Dan Haskett. I'm still friendly with all of these people, and Eric Goldberg, who drew exactly the way he draws now. Yeah. Eric Goldberg, Tom Cito, Dan Haskett, I'm probably leaving, Michael Sporn in New York, a million other people. And I could see what they were doing, and I was nowhere. They were so nice. They still are, but they were really.
What do you draw like? I mean, in your opinion, I mean, like me, I could, on a good day, I could be close to like Sergio Aragonés or something.
Sergio Aragonés on a subway.
Because I don't think I've ever seen you draw. That's why it's
let's see if I can draw something for people. I'll tell you how I draw. I draw two ways. I'll show you my real style, and then I spent years trying to draw Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck so I can draw them pretty well. Let's see if you can. Okay, I'm just running.
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
All right, let's see. I'm going to try something.
Oh, you're going to do it that way. Okay.
I don't know how to do it. How else should I do it?
I mean, you do it live, I guess, but I mean, you could do it on the.
I am doing it live, aren't I?
Well, yeah, but I mean, on the table and then lift it up. But okay.
Oh, well.
If it's easier for you. But you're doing it. Hey.
I'm also somebody who I had the mistaken, and of course you color that in, but.
Yeah. But like Mark Evanier, I didn't know he could draw, and then he pointed out, "Oh yeah, I can draw. Here's a cover I did with the Looney Tunes back in the '70s," and go, "Oh, yeah,
okay." He can actually letter too, which I find. There's my Daffy.
Cool.
I'm also, and then I have this other way of drawing, which is my. I used to draw comics.
It looks just like Bugs.
Yeah, I used to draw comics. I draw everything fast, and like I used to think like Kurt Swan and Jack Kirby just did what I'm doing, which is just drew without having to do any through lines or anything.
Right. That's the way I learned too.
I thought that's the way they drew the inked George Klein, Joe Sinnott version of their work. I thought was the way they drew. I didn't know that it was. So I learned in my mind to draw, just kind of draw everything exactly right immediately.
Yeah, that's how I was. It wasn't until
I draw, but that's there you go, Jerry.
Yeah, it wasn't until I took art instruction school that I learned the proper way to draw. But it's still, my level was like here, and everybody I knew was like, my hands off the screen. It's like.
I also had a feeling that back then that I had this great feeling, especially when I started working for United Artists. I started thinking, what animators need, because you got to understand it was different then, and animation was so beaten down. I kept thinking, what animators need? They need support in the other areas. They're not film distributors. They're not, this or that. So I'm going to be their friend in another place. That's something I had in my head. I've been able to do that throughout the years. When I was involved with Animation Magazine or many of the things that I've done, it's like I'm doing something that the animator themselves can't do. I'm helping them do it. That's part of what my whole life career thing has been.
Now, how did you become a writer? Because let me interrupt before you say it.
Okay.
In my mind, I never thought I would write anything because in high school, I hated writing. I couldn't stand it, and I realized because they made us write about books I didn't care about reading or writing about, and other creative writing things, like write about this cup, and it's like I don't want to write about that cup, Right. So nowadays if they say write about Casper, sure, blah, 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 it's like so. Did you have the same epiphany like that?
Yeah, well, no, not that. It was part of it was out of necessity. It's like I wanted to. My first article that was ever printed was not in Mind Rot, although around that same time I was beginning to do columns. I did little columns in Mind Rot, but my first actual thing, if anybody wants to find it, was in RBCC, Rocket Blast Comic Collector at Fanzine. And not Don Rosa, he was part of it, but James Van Hise was the editor, and they were doing an animation issue I had heard, and I wrote an article about Puppetoons, and I think that came out in '78 or so.
Okay,
I think actually I probably was writing for Mind Rot before that, but that's like my first article that I wrote anywhere, and then I was involved with Leonard, and then I got involved with, then I started doing some books. The being involved with Leonard Maltin was for me and my college education on writing, actually. I saw literally how he wrote, and I watched literally him write, and I literally was in the room with him composing sentences. So I got to learn, and then reading his books over and over again, I developed what I call my own style, but it's really, I'll be deadly honest. I've told it to his face. I said, basically, I'm doing what you do. I'm doing exactly what you do. I noticed what he does, certain little tricks that he does. Like he seems to start most of his little pieces one way and he ends them another way. And I try to do the same thing when I write. He's my mentor as far as that's concerned. It's almost like necessity is all I can say. It's like I wanted this to exist. In the case of the famous, amongst many books here, let me see, this famous one.
Yeah. I have that too.
Plus, I obviously did it.
I even have the old one too.
Right, the original one. Right.
I do have that.
We wanted those books to exist. There was nothing like it, and we wanted them to be. So the only thing you can do is to write it yourself. And so that's
some of my books too. It's like there's no book about Dennis the Menace. I'll write one. There's no book about DePatie Freeling that besides this one.
That one. Yeah.
So I wrote one. Anyway, I told you
that's
your
a book.
books there.
I feel free to ask me questions about any of that stuff.
That's also
there's answers to all the questions. That's all I can say.
But I do have a Maltin question since you said Maltin.
Okay.
I met him once a few years ago when I did my Disney book, and he was very gracious and nice. He always seems like a nice guy when I've seen him on interviews and on Entertainment Tonight and everything he's done for 100 years. Was he that way behind the scenes and more? I mean, it seems like he's pretty genuine. That's Leonard. Very excited about everything that he does, and he's like, "Oh boy."
No, Leonard's the real deal, and I feel bad about myself sometimes because I'm not as nice as he is. He's one of the nicest people ever. I'm not as nice as him. I'm I don't know what to say. I just he's what you see is what you get there. He's the real deal 100%. I mean, I think he'd admit to this if you've ever seen him on any early TV appearances and things. He was what we would all call later a nerd, way back when, before that term was ever.
Yeah, he was kind of golly all shucks. So I'm so excited to review this.
I mean, he wore the suits and had the glasses and back then short hair, which meant it was very nerdy, and then he as he aged and the world changes, it sort of perfectly fit in with the rest of the universe the way he is. But he's what can I say? I mean, he's one of my best friends. He's a really, really nice guy.
Well, I mean, you and him were my heroes. That's what everybody who isn't here that would who's read of Mice and Magic would probably say the same thing. I mean, that book was the godsend book. I mean, prior to that, I mean, you mentioned there was nothing except for an occasional article or fun.
No, there was. I can tell you what there was just for just to be fanish. There was Joe Adamson's Tex Avery King of Cartoons came out, which Leonard edited. Leonard was the editor of that. Yeah, and then. And my good friend Leslie Cabarga did the Fleischer story. And I think, and not counting, or counting The Art of Disney by Christopher Finch.
Yeah.
That came out. Those were the three main books that were out before Mice and Magic. And also, here's another trivial thing. The same year and month that of Mice and Magic came out, unbelievably, I remember, this has actually been forgotten by me. I don't know if anybody, another book came out, the Gerald Peary, the American
the one with Woody Woodpecker on the cover.
Yeah,
that one.
That awful drawing. That came out like the same week or
it's
something.
True.
Like, what
and I have it too, but I didn't.
That was a weird thing.
Yeah, but and back then you could get all the books. I mean, for me, the most fascinating thing is when I used to look up things in the encyclopedia. So I mean, it's like.
But they would have like a panel from Nancy.
Yeah, it's something, and it's like you'd look up like Walt Disney, and it's like, I didn't know much about Walt Disney other than I knew he died the day I was born. I've said this before, yes, the actual day, but. I didn't know how long ago the cartoons were made because, you don't pay attention to that. I didn't, it's so I was reading the Encyclopedia Britannica or something. It said Walt Disney, born 1901, blah, 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 blah. And it says his first major motion picture feature film animated was Snow White, which came out in 1937. And I was like, oh, because my dad was born in 1938 and still with us. And I go, this movie's older than him? That's not possible.
Right.
Because I thought they were all made like in the 50s or 60s. I didn't think they were made in the 30s. And then I found out the same epiphany with like the Three Stooges. They had some show, and even my mom pointed out, it's like, oh, Mo Howard's going to be on this show. Okay. Who's this old man? And it's like, I didn't realize how long ago a lot of these things were done that I was liking.
I remember feling that way. Well, with animation, it's a little easier because it really doesn't date, meaning unless there's
and I think that's why it was a bigger shock.
Yeah.
That's why I said, I thought, because I knew I saw Snow White in 1975. That was the reissue.
Right.
And I knew it was a reissue, but I didn't know. I figured it came out probably in like 55 or something, 60, whatever.
Right.
I didn't know dates, and it's like
37. No, they tried very hard to hide that. It's like I collect the press books, and they like the 1975 press, and they make it look like it's a 1975 movie with the ads, It's when I teach, I'm teaching animation history, and I actually go out of my way with my PowerPoints to only show my students, in the case of the Disney films, that the original advertising, original posters in 1937, I don't show them any later reissue. I know it's a weird thing. I don't say anything to them about it. We talk about the movie and I show the poster, and but because I don't want them to think, I want them to know, I want them actually to think it's an old movie. I want them to think it's old. I want them to think it's some, this is what happened way back when, way before any of us were born. And
it's true. Even my dad. So, you know.
Next question.
Next question. Okay. So part of the reason, you know, I said when I emailed you, I said, you know, eventually I was going to ask you to be on the podcast. You know, I just wanted to get a bunch under my belt and get, you know, it's not like you're so special. It's just that, you know, I get all the bugs out of the system before, you know. And so anyway, the other day, I actually finally got this on Blu-ray. It was the Batman, the movie with Adam West and Burt Ward. You're on it. I think you're probably on the original DVD, not just this Blu-ray, but I didn't.
I think I'm only on the Blu-ray. I could be wrong.
Oh, okay. So anyway, I said, you're on everything, and it just made me think, and you kind of alluded to it either before the show or during the show, you know, I'm interested in a lot of other stuff than animation, but, you know, that's what I'm kind of pigeonholed and you know, the other stuff you're interested in, you can rattle off other stuff you're interested in. I'm probably interested in most of the same stuff. What happened in your career or whatever to kind of gear you towards animation more than, say, working at a comic book company like DC or working in feature films as maybe a director or something, you know, just something different, because you had these interests. You saw Batman on TV. You were all excited. You know, you could have followed that path. You could have said, I'm going to work for DC and draw a Batman or whatever, you know. So
I wanted to. I heard you when you were talking to Danny. I think he alluded to, maybe he didn't, but I was actually one of those kids in New York, and I took the famous DC. DC had a tour in their build of their offices in the 60s, and I don't know how long that lasted, maybe into the 70s. But when I was like 13 or something, I took the tour. I also went to Mad Magazine. I also went. They didn't have a tour, but they let you walk around. It was the weirdest free. I met
was this on Madison or on Third?
Madison.
Okay.
For Madison for Mad.
Yeah.
And for DC, it was 575 Lexington Avenue.
Oh, wow.
Before they moved to that Third. I've never been to that when they were.
No, Third, Mad was on 3rd Street.
Was it?
Like early 60s or something.
No, this was the, what was that address? It was like 385 Madison or something like that. It was, it's in all the books.
Yeah.
And I even went up to Marvel once, but like everybody says, I famously saw there was a door. You open the door. There was like one office, and there was a person, you know, Stan's assistant. I don't think it was Flo Steinberg. And there was literally nothing to see. And they told you there was nothing to see. And so I just left, you know. But I was that kind of a fan that would go visit the offices. But DC had an organized tour, and they allowed you, I wish I still had this. They allowed you to go fish through this garbage. They had a big garbage dumpster full of original art they were throwing away. But it was picked over, I assume, because the piece I had was like a Bob Hope page or something. And even then it was like one of those pages that's like only half the page, and they would have the ad for Tootsie Rolls or something.
Oh yeah.
So but I had that for years. It was on my wall for years, this Bob Hope half a page, you know, that I fished out of the treasure. I'm sorry to say I don't have it anymore, but I mean, I loved comics, and I went up there and I saw Kurt Swan drawing and stuff. Oh man, I still remember all of this. I don't know what you know what, fate just takes you by the hand in a weird way and leads you to what you're going to do. I say this now as an older fellow, and I'm looking back now at what my life was like when I was. Those days, when I was in my early 20s, late teens, I had no freaking idea what I was going to do for a living, or where I was going to be when I was aged 45, or, you know, what was I going to be when I was 40? I remember I'd say 45 because I figured out early on that 45 is how old I'd be in the year 2000. I wondered if I'd still be alive to see the century change.
In the year 2000.
Yeah, I know. So I always wondered about that. And then finally you start doing stuff, and then you don't think about it. And then when you get older, you start wondering what happened. But you're right. It could have gone many different ways. Part of it was because I was in New York, and you would think that would lead me to comic books more. But actually you would, wouldn't you? No.
Did you go to Harvey? Did you go to Harvey's office?
Never went to Harvey when it was in New York, although I had a friend. Who I don't even know if he got a job out of it. I did pitch me and a friend pitched a one-page like opening thing to Harvey, and it was rejected by Sid. I luckily, as you know, I got to meet and work with Sid years later. But I was friends with, and I don't know what happened to him, and I've heard some kooky stories if you're out there, Murad, but I was friends with a guy named Murad Guman. You probably know his name. Because Murad, Murad did a lot of stories for Crazy.
Yeah.
And his father was Sururi Guman, who did a lot of artwork for Cracked, right?
Well, I interviewed Murad 10 years ago, but that was for the Crack book, but I haven't really talked to him since.
This probably shouldn't be on but was Murad working at Disney in New York, or where was he?
Geez, I don't even remember where he was because I was just interested. It wasn't like this. It's not like this where we're just shooting the breeze for an hour. Yeah. It's like I was very direct. I said, "What did your dad do in Cracked?" And I asked a few crazy questions because let me give you my. He had worked for Crazy.
You might enjoy my story here, which is another digression. When I went to high school in Flushing, Queens, John Bowne High School.
I'm thinking the nanny now.
Yeah, no, and I grew up.
It's one of those crushing scenes. Anyway,
yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
Anyway, when I went to high school and I was already into comics, but it was like I said, a secret. You couldn't tell anybody because they'd think you were nutty, you know. And comic books, cartoons, science fiction movies. People forget that. That was part of the mix. If you like science fiction movies, you were crazy too. So you didn't tell anybody. So I was sitting in a class in high school, and I don't know how I was talking to the guy next to me, and somehow I mentioned something, well, that's like those movies that Ray Harryhausen does, you know, and the guy looked at me like, you know who Ray Harryhausen is? I go, yeah, do you? I go, and like, he ended up becoming friends, and that guy was Murad Guman.
Wow.
And so we became friends, and one day he invited me to his house after school to hang out, and Murad was making home movies, and he was also a really good artist, I thought at the time. And I went over to his house, and he's like, I don't know how he somehow he introduced me to where his dad worked in the house. Yeah. Now, when you're a kid in the 60s or early 70s, parents didn't work at home. They went to the office, you know, the classic thing. But his dad worked at home and had his own home studio. And then I went in it, and his dad was a cartoon. I didn't know this. His dad was, he had been the, as you may know, the ghost artist for Kerry Drake, the comic strip. Yeah. And he did everything but the heads, I think. I think Alfred Andreola did the heads or something. And Sururi Guman was a fantastic artist. And he was also doing the David Cassidy comic book for Charlton. I mean, I don't know if you knew that or not. He also did
I think I did retrospectively, but not.
I actually think I'm not a big Charlton fan. It's probably my least favorite comic book company. But his comics, the stories he drew were the best. He should have worked for better, you know, comic book companies. Yeah. And I still have, I think to this day, I still have a page of Sururi Guman, David Cassidy comics.
Wait, you have that and you don't have the Bob Hope? Wait.
No, I have that.
Did you sell it or did you drop that?
I don't know what happened to the Bob Hope.
It seems like you keep everything, so that's what
I do. I know. I also have my one page that if you didn't read about this on the line, you might have read this as I posted about it. But at one point, Murad drew me into the Battlestar Galactica parody he did for Crazy Magazine. If you can find the Battlestar Galactica, you'll enjoy this. If you don't know this, Mark, this will give you a thrill. If you find that issue, and I know you've got it.
It's number 47. I know.
I think it's got The Wiz is the parody on the cover.
Well then that's 48. But 47
I could be wrong.
47 has Battlestar Galactica on the cover.
Well, maybe that's the issue. It's the issue as a Battlestar Galactica parody. Okay. Yeah. I don't know why I'm saying The Wiz. Maybe there's some other reason for that one. But anyway, and then read the story. The story is that they meet this crazy collector named Jerry, and it's me, and it's a character of me without my glasses, and what I looked like back then. Yeah. And he did it totally, and he totally handed it to me. It was a complete surprise thing. I mean, it doesn't mention Jerry Beck or whatever, but it was me. The character that it's supposed to be is me. Ridiculous. Anyway, and I think I have a page of that somewhere.
Speaking of Charlton, I know you didn't like it, but did you ever go to Charlton?
Oh, God.
I know it was a derby. Yeah.
No, they were in Connecticut. They were a little too far for me.
Okay. I drove past where it was about
Yeah.
10 years ago when I was in New York last, but
Charlton fascinates me. I seem to like, so far in buying back issues of things, I like I don't even know what year they started, but I like the 50s stuff that they did. I'm not
it's
the one
1945.
really.
They had like one title, like Zoo Animals or something like that.
Oh,
and then
yeah.
slowly they were slow in getting titles, not like the way things are now where everybody has like 50 books or something. It's like they put like one book out every other year, it seemed like.
I mean,
Anyway,
they were a company that could have been something, and there were people throughout the years who tried to make it something, especially in the later years.
Well, their only advantage is they had their own printing presses, so, but even though they're kind of schlocky.
I hated that mechanical lettering they used. You remember that? They had that weird mechanical.
Well, I always remember you opened it up and there's like the little tatter at the bottom because it was almost like they're always at the beginning of a new paper roll every print.
Exactly. Exactly.
You got to save every little square inch of paper.
Like
you can't make a nice clean cut.
It also seemed like they used the worst paper. There was just something funky about their pulp paper.
That was probably the mafia thing. I don't know. Anyway.
I miss pulp comics. There must be somebody today doing a comic book, but they're doing
there is one company that's putting out like comics that are $1. Unfortunately, it's like nothing licensed and nothing anybody knows. I bought a few of them, and they cost $1, and they're printed the traditional way with newsprint on the inside, glossy covers. I forgot the name of the company. I'd have to look it up. But I go, wow, if this got traction, it might be interesting. But anyway.
All right, what other part of my career, my so-called career, do you want to cover?
Well, I mean, you're also a Monkees fan. Did you ever have a band or anything like that? Or are you more like a fan than a?
No, I was a fan. I've recounted this a couple of times, but famously in my life.
Even Michael Ventrella had a few bands before he became a lawyer.
No, I wasn't. No, I all right, let me give you my quick origin of me with my love of Monkees. One day in 1966, we in my house, we had a black and white TV in the living room, and we had a crummier TV in another room, but we had the big black and white one in the living room. And my sisters I have two sisters, and they seemed to have control over what we were going to watch on most nights, but luckily we all liked the same things. One night, I wanted to watch Gilligan, as I recall. I believe Gilligan was opposite the Monkees, and
the first season.
And they kind of twisted my arm because they were already watching the Monkees, and I was like, "Oh, it's some girl thing. I don't want to watch this." I ended up watching it, and the episode I still remember the first one that I saw, which was the grandfather episode. So that I didn't catch it right from the beginning. That said, I still remember forever seeing the ads for the Monkees before they went on the air, that were the ones that were drawn by Jack Davis. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And so I thought, wow, Jack Davis. I even knew the name. I said, Jack Davis. I thought, this is cool. But I didn't watch the show, and they made me watch that episode, and I couldn't believe this show. And I every week when I watched it from that point on. I remember turning around to see if anybody else was in the room with me, like, did you just see what I just saw? Because I couldn't believe this stuff. My favorite thing was that episode. I think it's the Chinese. Joey Foreman is the Chinese guy. The episode where maybe it's not that one, but there's an episode where Mickey, something happens in the show. Mickey walks off the set past the crew into a room where the writers are, and it's all these Chinamen smoking opium or something. When he gets his page and he goes back to the set and they resume. And I'm like, what the fuck did I just
It's totally non-PC nowadays, but it's still fun. It's still funny, I hate to say.
Back then when Gidget was the normalcy, of TV shows, right? Could you imagine like Ozzie and Harriet doing that? I mean, nobody did that kind of thing, and it was like so subversive. And also, and of course, around that time, it was an episode where they turn into monkey men, and they're flying off, and it was like, this is like a cartoon, but it's live action. I never saw anything like it. I'm like, I love this show, and I got so into the show because I love cartoons. So the show was like a cartoon to me, and I liked the music. I got their albums. I was a fan, and then like the rest of the world, I let it subside. The second season, I'm still to this day not a big fan of the second season or the second half of the second season. I know people who love it, and I can appreciate it and love it, and I can get into it as a big fan. But I prefer the original premise of the show, the first season and a half where they play a rock band that's out of work. I like that premise, and then so I let the Monkees had died out. 1968 rolls around, and I've told this story too, which is I saw those ads in the Village Voice head. I'm like, it didn't say the monkey, just the head, I'm like, what the fuck is this? And I'm 13. And this is that age. 13 was the year that I went to Manhattan by myself a lot. Yeah. I went to the Comic-Con. So November 1st or whatever date it was in November, I saw two things. I saw Yellow Submarine on its first day in Manhattan, and at the first theater it played it, where they gave away free submarine sandwiches. I'll never forget. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, at least in New York City.
They never talk about American things. I mean, I have to interrupt here. On Yellow Submarine, they always talk about it being a flop. Well, it was a flop in England. It wasn't in the United States.
No.
But, the story goes because whatever England goes, the Beatles go. Whatever whatever they say about the Beatles in England is what becomes the fact. And it's like. Right. No, I think it was a big hit here.
Well, on the flip side, whatever day it was, the same month in November, I decided I was going to see this unusual advertised movie called Head, even though I knew literally. Again, you got to remember, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have people leaking trailers, or there wasn't any of this stuff. Nobody knew anything about this movie. I didn't read the 16 magazines to hear about this upcoming monkey movie. I found out about that later. I just was going to see a freaky, weird 1968 Head movie, and I just went. I went like in the middle of an afternoon. I still remember it was raining out at the one theater. It was playing in two theaters in Manhattan, and I walked in, and I think it said on the marquee as I was going in, "The Monkees in Head," and I'm like, "The Monkees?" And I went in, and here's another thing. I still remember back in those days, I always tell my students this, nobody remembers this. Back in the 60s, people only loosely paid attention to what time a movie started. Like if it said movies, it was at 1, 3, 4. People back then, I was part of it. People just went into the movies whatever time they went to the movie, they got there. So I remember getting there, and you didn't care. That famous expression that we've all heard, that famous line, this is where I came in. You've always heard somebody say that. That's based on people saying that in the movie theater because they see, oh, this is where we came in, and then they leave. Yeah. And my family used to do this all the time when I was a kid. And so I was just used to it. I came in, I still remember I walked in the door, and it was the cheerleading scene near the beginning. Give us war, right? And I'm sitting there waiting to see what the story is, but no story ever emerges. It goes from one thing to another, right? And I'm like, this is like the craziest, like the same attitude I had 2 years earlier watching the earliest episodes of the Monkees. And I'm like, is anybody else seeing this? So you're
looking behind yourself.
I had the same feeling about this movie. I said, is anybody else noticing this movie here? This is like the most insane thing I've ever seen. And it's almost like the ultimate version of the TV show, or at least the first season of the TV show.
Now, how many people were in the audience? Was it a full house?
Hardly anybody. There were people. It was the first day, so they had this like group of people. I didn't really notice the audience, to be honest. My mind was blown, and I ended up seeing it 2 more times when it played. About a month later, it played.
Oh, I thought you just sat in the theater and just kept watching.
No, it played in Flushing, Queens, with the Love-Ins. That was a Sam Katzman hippie picture that just ran on TCM recently, and I watched it over again. Horrible movie. But so I went in for Head, then I saw the Love-Ins, then I watched Head again, and I bought the album, which I still have when it came out, and that the album, because as you know, it has almost the whole soundtrack, not quite, of the movie. That was one way for me to relive it, because again, no video, no VH, we didn't have any way to see a movie again, and it took years. I wrote to Bob Rafelson. There was an article about Bob Rafelson because he became famous later, 2 years later, with 5 Easy Pieces and King of Marvin Gardens, and there was an article about him in the Daily News in New York, and I said, I'm just going to write this guy a letter and say, because he mentions Head in the article. oh, that was his first movie. I didn't pay attention, So I wrote him a letter, and he wrote me back saying, oh, don't worry, Head will be around. It's in the vault, That's all he really wrote me. But it was like, because I was like desperate to see it again. And I thought, how would I? And then finally, it did show up two places, mainly in New York City. There was this repertory theater called the Elgin Cinema, and they brought it back, and it was like, whoa. And anyway, I've been a fanatic for it. When I started collecting 16 millimeter films, I immediately was on the outlook, and immediately I lucked out and got a print of Head, Technicolor 16 print that I had back in the late 70s. So I was able to watch it over and over, which I saw that movie so many times. And so I'm a big nut on Head. I have a lot of the press kits and lobby cards and, and all the stills and all that kind of stuff. And that's why I got to thank you, although I think they misspelled my name on Andrew Sandoval, who I got to meet. He married a friend of mine, so I ended up meeting him, and I met him before his book came out on the monkeys, which I love. And he came over to my place, and I showed him what I call my monkey file, and he's borrowed a couple of things, just a few. He has everything, but he did borrow. I had a few things he didn't have, so he gave me thanks in a couple of places. But that's my only monkey involvement. One last thing I'll say though, just to be thorough. No, me and my friend Fred Velez.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're friends with Fred. I knew that.
Fred and I met. Fred and I met at the Elgin Cinema at the end of the screening of Head. I was outside looking at the poster, just looking at it for a while, and this other guy was looking at it too, and we were both looking at it. And then it didn't even occur to me. And I don't know, somehow we struck up a conversation and we became friends. That was Fred. And then Fred and I collaborated on an article that was published in Video Review magazine somewhere before the monkeys were on MTV. It was like 1984, 85, roughly. And it was an article about the monkeys and with a checklist of all the episodes. And it was the only thing like that.
I think I have that. Is that like a little small?
It's no. Video reviews. No. Video reviews a regular full-size.
Okay. I think I have it or had it.
I have it somewhere. I have it somewhere, but when we wrote it, we were very proud because literally nobody had written publicly anywhere about monkeys for 10 or 15 years, and we like to think that somebody at MTV saw it and then decided to ask about it and put the monkeys back on the air. We don't know if that happened, but we'd like to think it. We were ahead of that. Yeah. But and so that's my only real monkey involvement. I did get to meet. I sold Peter a 16 millimeter print. So yeah, that's another thing. I ended up buying as many 16 millimeter prints of the monkeys as I could find.
Just episodes?
Episodes. Many of them with the original commercials I ended up having. And so that's all. A lot of these commercials that even you see Andrew Sandoval plays with at the concerts where it's the they show like the Yardley commercial or some of the Rice Krispies. Those come from the prints that I believe they do. I believe they come from the prints that I had way back when, and I saved them. I sold Peter Tork his episode, Monkeys Mind Their Manner. I had a print of it, and I met somebody who knew Peter Tork in New York. And they said, "You've got that?" And so Peter Tork called me up and asked me if he could buy it from me. And I was like, how do I say no to Peter? I didn't want to sell it, but how do I say no to Peter Tork? He sent me a check. I sold it for like $20 or $25.
Oh, wow.
And I still have a Xerox of the check somewhere because that's the only thing I got out of it. So that's that. I think did I meet any of the other monkeys? No, not really. I mean, I met Mike recently at a book signing.
I met all of them, but it was just fortuitous timing.
I saw him back with Mickey. My dream goal, I sat near Mickey, not next to near Mickey at the Stan Freberg tribute that was at the Egyptian a few years ago. And I really wanted to go over there and talk to him. I was one of the speakers, as he was. And so I thought maybe we could get to talk, and I couldn't. It was just not doable. But my goal this is my goal. I'll say it publicly. I've talked to people who know him. My goal is to get him on Leonard Maltin's podcast, and for this reason. Yeah. And I've talked to Leonard about it, and Leonard gets it, which is forget about the monkeys. I want to ask Mickey completely about Circus Boy and his father. His father was a big movie star in the 40s, and Circus Boy, he worked with Sterling Holloway. If you look at who was on Circus Boy, he worked with everybody. Yes, and it's like no one's ever asked him about that. I'd love to see that interview,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
yeah,
I think they kind of delve in it a little bit when Mickey was on Gilbert Gottfried's podcast, but still, they were a little bit kind of raw Monkees fans too, you know.
Mickey has dropped a lot of hints. I call them hints in a lot of his interviews, talking about that past. Like, one could actually go through every interview he ever did and actually compile some version of what I'm looking for. But my favorite one, and I forgot where this was, it might have been in his book, where he talks about when he was on the Columbia Ranch, which is now Warner Brothers lot on Hollywood Way in Burbank. It's where the Warner Brothers cartoons studio is now. And that's where they filmed. That's where all those that street with the Partridge Family house and the Bewitched house and all that stuff is still there right now. And but he says in one of his interviews when he was doing the Monkees that he had this relationship with the guard at the gate because he was the same guy who was the guard when he was doing Circus Boy, because that was filmed there too. I love that. I mean, it's like, wow, you know, it's like he was the only one he had a history. I find that all fascinating, you know, how they came together and all their different reactions to that situation of being the Monkees. It is very interesting to me.
Now, since you generally know about like animation, you know, the hang-ups and whatever of getting things released, is there one about Circus Boy that is preventing that from being released? Because I mean, you could market it as before he was a monkey, you know, and I think people would buy it. I don't know if Columbia cares. Are they the ones that are?
That's probably the bottom line, is they don't care. But they do care enough that I believe they restored them, right? Weren't they?
Yeah, well, they restored everything. I thought they went one year and restored like the trailers and everything that they ever did, the newsreels and everything or whatever, you know. And so it just seems like a no-brainer unless they don't have the rights. Well,
that's been the problem. As you just said, they restored. I'm a big nut for the old movie serials. They restored the movie serials. They restored the Scrappy cartoons. They've restored everything. But the problem is the people who do the restoration do it because it's shining up and keeping their assets available for, in theory, someone in some other part of the company who's going to sell it somewhere and do something with it. The problem is nobody at the other part of the company is doing anything with it. That's the problem.
That's so weird. See, I always said this, you know, it's like, if I was running some sort of movie studio, example, it doesn't matter, and I found out John Wayne did one film for my studio, but it was a terrible, sucky movie he did when he was, you know, really young or something. Right. I put that thing out day one, you know, it's like, John Wayne in this, you know, it's like, look, you know, and I do it with
I happen to be, again, I don't mean to be, I'm not going to go off on these tangents, but one of my other things I've never written about or talk about is I'm a nut for B-Westerns from the old days. That's the thing with me. And you just described exactly what happened at Warner Brothers. And you probably know this, that Leon Schlesinger produced, I think it was 6 John Wayne B-Westerns in 1934, 35. And Warner Brothers owns them. And if you ever see any of the movies from the 30s that John Wayne's in, they all look like crap. But Warner Brothers, to their credit, a bunch of years ago, restored all the Leon Schlesinger, John Wayne B-Westerns. They're out. They're on DVD. I don't know if they're on Blu-ray, but they're easily, and they're on TCM. They look great. You know, those were actually his first starring Westerns, believe it or not. People don't. I mean, he starred in some other. Well, it gets complicated.
Right. But you know what I mean. It's like, so, you know, I wouldn't say that Circus Boy would have been a high priority, but after 40 years of reunions or 30 years of reunions, and the Monkees are still viable in 2020, putting out a live album, and the two are still touring and stuff like that, you know, you think, you know, maybe we could put this out as a special set and get Mickey to do some commentaries, you
would think, but as you know, I have a whole other career with trying to convince studios to do stuff with their assets, I call them.
Yeah, well, I know you said on Stu's show once, you said, like, animation's like the bottom of the barrel, so is TV like one notch above, and it's like, you know, okay.
It's one notch above.
Yeah, okay.
In fact, I'd almost say it could be like this, because at least the cartoons are in color. See, that gives them some, I mean the ones that are in color, that gives them some viability. Whereas TV shows could be in black and white, which is a notch down. And if it's, you know, there was one year I think I mentioned this on Stu's show actually recently, but But there was one year about, oh my God, probably 20 years ago, where that I had cable. We all have cable TV, and I had WGN from Chicago. And there was a law. So I did talk about this on Stu, and somebody wrote in to correct what I'm saying here exactly. But there was a law that you couldn't, like, if Cheers, let me see if I have this right. If Cheers was on in our market here in LA, like on Channel 9, but they were running it on Superstation WGN, they had to, by law, change it if WGN was being, on cable TV and you could see it in LA, they had to change it so that they mask that half hour with something else.
Yeah.
So what happened what happened was, oh my God, it was glorious. They got a package from NBC or something like that. It was a bunch of old NBC and Republic owned TV shows. And it was stuff like Pete and Gladys, Captain Nice, My World and Welcome to It. I mean, I'm trying to remember the ones that I was watching, but it was like suddenly 20 years ago, there was this little golden age of these shows nobody saw except we saw them, like, wow, that when they were running in the beautiful Cheers time slot. I'm like, wow, this is great stuff. Anyway.
I mean, is that the same problem? Like, I don't know if Columbia is streaming anything right now because I don't know all the rules, but it's like
Columbia is an oddity because they're not, Sony, they're owned by Sony, they're not part of Peacock or this or that, HBO.
Because it just seems weird. It's like even Disney Plus, which I think they've done pretty well, but I think of all the years, Greg Ehrbar was on the last episode, we were talking about all the anthology episodes that they've never come out on video. They might have come out on tape, but they haven't come out on DVD. They're not on Blu-ray, and they were on Disney Channel 30 years ago, and then they're just kind of there. And you're saying, well, a lot of them have to be remastered, but then I have a few that have been remastered, and they're still not putting them on there. And it's like, it can't be that only Mandalorian and Hancock fans are buying this channel. I didn't buy it.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I like to say ye of little faith. What I mean is, all my Warner Brothers cartoons. I mean, look, my attitude is they're going to put more of the old Warner cartoons on.
Because they've got to be searching for product. I mean, even Disney could sublease using Circus Boy again and say, "Oh, we're going to put Circus Boy on Disney Plus."
No. I'm old enough to have seen this problem happen 2 or 3 times, and the problem is, unfortunately, the audience's expectations. What I mean by that is this: I remember this being this way with VHS, and then later with DVD, and now it's with the streaming services. Everybody expects everything immediately. Now, if we're up to me, you'd have everything immediately. But everybody expects it. They never put all this stuff out immediately. It sometimes takes years, but they eventually do it. I still remember when VHS happened. People kept saying, actually, they had the flip side. There was a perception that everything was out on VHS at one point. And people like me would go, well, no, that's not available. That's rare. I'd be telling people, you're talking about a film that you think it's out, but it's not. And then the flip side, I think with DVD, there was suddenly this fandom for everything where everybody wanted it right away. And I get that. I'm there too. But they don't do that. But I believe they will. I really do. I just, maybe I'm stupid. I just believe that they really will put out this stuff eventually.
But I mean, using Disney Plus as an example, it's like, I'm always sent, I think it's the guy, I might be pronouncing his name wrong, but he's a Facebook guy. I think he knows you too, Antonio Marks or something like that. And he always CCs me Disney Plus stuff, the new stuff coming out. And invariably, it's like another National Geographic documentary, another Marvel thing, another Muppet thing. And it's like, can't you kind of throw, like I have, and this is the one I was telling Greg Ehrbar, I have the Scarecrow of Romney Marsh from the Disney Movie Club on Blu-ray. So I know that's been remastered. Right. It's not on Disney Plus. Why not? It could take 2 seconds to throw it on there for Halloween. It's it's like. By
the way, it looks to me that some of the redos, remasterings are better than I've ever seen them before. On a couple of things that I've seen that I've noticed this on. One is
watch Treasure Island. It's like, whoa, they
really?
you know, it's like it's daytime. It's not like this muddy piece of shit like it looked forever. You know?
Right. I mean, I'm a nut for Melody Time, and the Melody Time print on that channel is the best. And I'm not a big fan of Sword in the Stone, but it looks amazing on that Disney Channel.
All the cartoons look really good. They added Trick or Treat, the little short with Donald Duck, and whoa, you know, it's like a brand new cartoon. You know, it's like, you know, granted they do computer coloring corrections and you don't see the brush strokes anymore. I get it, you know, but it's like,
and I mean, I'm probably the only, they haven't put on, I have a mental problem that I grew up with. I was the right age, and I know how bad it is, but I'm a fan of the 2 Merlin Jones movies, and those aren't on.
I know.
But yet the Disney Movie Club put them out.
Yeah, they're on DVD. They're not too bad. I mean, it's like I don't know how much remastering.
But they're
that technology I don't know. It's like how much remastering needs to be done if it looks pretty sharp on the DVD to put on streaming. I mean, does it have to be 1080 or whatever for it to be HP
I think,
HD or whatever?
I think there is, but I'm not the biggest expert on that either. People think I am, but I'm not. I think there is. They're also, when they remaster stuff, at least my friends at Warner Brothers, what they're trying to do is they're trying to go one step ahead. They're trying to remaster stuff for whatever the next G that's, you know, the next thing that's going to come up for it. That's what they're doing. They actually did that a long time ago. That's why stuff is available now, because they actually remastered stuff 10 years ago that is perfect for now. But and the new stuff they're doing, they're trying to do it.
Now, I'm going to ask a Stu type question, but it's actually one that's, because he doesn't care about anything in the 70s or later on anything, it seems. No. Anyway, but for a while there, Warner Archives was kind of issuing, just kind of haphazardly and randomly, just any old Hanna-Barbera cartoon show from the 70s, 80s, or 90s, you know, or whatever. So you'd get Roman Holidays, you'd get Chan Clan, you'd get, you know, all this bullshit, crap shit. But I have a fondness for it because I was a little kid at the time and I wanted to see it. And so there's a few that are just like not out, you know. And is there a reason for it? They just haven't got to it yet. Like Those Were the Days is one. It's a Walton's type of thing, you know. And it's like, I never watched it as a kid. I thought it sucked, but I'm kind of curious to see it now, you know. So is there a chance that these missing ones will be put out? Or
well, there's a chance. Look, I'm not the biggest expert on that. I had nothing to do with any of those, except I learned that the reason a lot of these random Hanna-Barbera shows came out on DVD or whatever format is because they were remastered for Europe. And so thus somebody in Europe, or the whole company in Europe, paid the money to remaster it, and thus it cost them no money to put it out here, and that's why they did it. Those were the days. Nobody had
done that one.
Why I was able to get them to put out, not that anybody cares, that I will never regret it.
I was going to ask about that.
About Johnny Cypher and Dimension Zero. They look beautiful if you've looked at it. They are remastered because somebody in Europe, Warner Brothers, got an order to do it. They spent the money. They did it, so it cost them no money. And believe me, it took me years to say, look, it'll cost you no money. It's already done. And they just did it at the end of the rope here. They just did it to get me to stop talking about it. I really want them to put out the.
Well, are there other things like that, or can you not name show names?
Well, no, there's things like
shows that are remastered that they could put out, but they don't.
Another one that you may not care about that they did remaster and then didn't put it out for years. I bugged them about it. I'm not taking any full credit here, but I, like Johnny Cypher, I was like, why don't you put this out? And that's Marine Boy, whatever you think of it. But the thing is, they're beautiful if you look at the copies of it. But they remastered that, and they couldn't care less about putting that out. And when they started doing Warner Archives, they're a little more open to putting out stuff. If it's sitting there and it's not going to cost them any money, they're interested. They would.
Yeah. So I guess my main question, without revealing everything, because I'm not going to.
I don't have anything.
Is there a bunch of stuff that's just sitting there, you know, that they could put out because it's been remastered, but they don't because they're just. Because it seems to me, with a Warner Archives, if it's done, it's all print on demand, as it were. Right. So if nobody buys it, it's no great loss. I mean,
right?
You know,
That's
the
the Johnny Cipher story. You're talking.
Yeah, but they got one sale. I did buy the thing, so
Oh, good. Oh, thank God. Thank God.
I justified the existence.
Justified the entire production.
And it wasn't that bad, I'll admit. I don't know why you like it so much, but it's not
funny.
that
I like it from the flip side. It's hilarious to me. That's what I like it. In fact, and Sid, by the way, wrote many of them, as you may know.
Yeah.
Sid Jacobs.
And that was the reason I took a chance on it, because I vaguely remember it as a kid. Barely.
Oh, I didn't grow up. It didn't even play in New York. I saw it later, and I couldn't believe it. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Anyway, I still can't believe that show.
I don't know. In New York, did you have a Kaiser television station?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Well, you might know. I don't. When did you move to LA?
86.
Oh, okay. So that's a long time later.
No,
See, from 73 to 76, I lived in Palos Verdes, and they had a Kaiser station, Channel 52. And they used to play stuff like that. They played the bizarrest stuff, and there was a similar one which I eventually worked at later when Kaiser wasn't owning it, called Channel 44 in San Francisco, KBHK. But all these Kaiser stations, when they ran it, they would run all the same shows on all their stations. So you get Three Stooges, you get Speed Racer, you get Little Rascals, you'd get a Johnny Cipher, Huck and Yogi Casper, Popeye. I can rattle them off because they played them the whole time I lived down there, and it's like, and then when I moved back to Bay Area, San Francisco area, they played all the same stuff too, but I couldn't get Channel 44 as well. So, because pre-cable. So it's like, but that's where I saw a lot of that stuff.
Oh my God.
Anyway.
Yeah, those are the days.
But you didn't have a station equivalent like that in New York then?
Well, we didn't have that. We didn't have that one. We had Channel 5, WNEW. We had WPIX. Channel 11, those were the two biggies. And then we had Channel 9, which played all the weirder stuff. They were an RKO station, not Kaiser. They were RKO. And those were the three. Between those three and being in the biggest market, we got mostly everything. Johnny Cipher is one of the few shows that I believe never played, but I'd be hard-pressed to name another show. I can think of a lot of junk that played. Now, we did have also UHF stations that were like out in the boonies or New Jersey or way out in Long Island, and they played a lot more weirdo stuff. But somehow we could see everything. We even had in New York we had some Japanese channels on UHF back in the 70s that ran like the giant robot shows from that time in Japanese, and that's like how a lot of us
Space Giants and
little stuff like
Ultraman and that.
Ultraman, Go Ranger. The original, I want to say, like, not the Transformers, but, those giant robots. I forgot the name now.
Oh, Space Giants.
Well,
that's the one I know. It had Goldar and Silbar and, whatever. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, Mazinga, like Mazinga Z, right? Yeah. That kind of thing. Anyway, we had like everything you could think of was in New York for the most part. We didn't have any specific horrible local channel that ran all the weirdo stuff. It's like they all ran weirdo stuff. They ran them at 6 in the morning and 5:30 in the morning, and it was a golden age of junk. No wonder. That's why I ended up doing that cartoon dump show. That's why I collected that stuff. I always collected those films on 16.
I'm surprised for cartoon dump you found things I never saw, because I would seek out the weirdest stuff on TV.
Well, I mean, I was literally seeking. Well, actually, that comes out of my worst cartoons ever shows that I was doing in San Diego, and so thus I spent a few years. I already had my own collection, but then after doing it a year, 2 years, 3 years, I suddenly started going over to my friends and saying, well, do you have anything that's really bad? I mean, like funny bad, and people would haul out these things that I never heard of or nobody ever heard of. Sometimes they were pilots. Unbelievably, they had them. There were pilot shows that were the Mummy Nappers is one that comes to mind that I showed. That's all silhouettes. It's silhouettes of humans against cartoon backgrounds. It was just one episode. I have it. And of course, there's something called, what was it called? I'm forgetting the name of it. It's not a Batman thing. It was more of a Bat Masterson thing. I forgot the name of it now. But just incredible, weird stuff that I think I hit the ceiling on that, though. I kind of exhausted everybody's. I'm still looking for bad things. If anybody,
Thank you for listening, and thank you, Jerry Beck, for being my special guest. Episode number 91, with part 2 of this interview, will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a Patreon of Mark Arnold and Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help in continuing the production of my books and this podcast. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel. The opening and closing music for the Fun Ideas podcast is provided courtesy of Andrew the Slow Poisoner Goldfarb and is used with permission. This has been the Fun Ideas podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2020, Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you, and good night.
Headed home to a cardboard hut with duct tape doors. At the price I'm paying, be glad it isn't yours. Now get up, Crab Mountain, get up. 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 That mountain of crab. And don't fall back. Don't fall